Howdy, buddy. Jerry McHugh Jr. here with another edition of the SJIQ. We have two exciting guests this week. We're calling it the R&D IQ with Robert Bryce and David Blackmon. What strikes me about these two energy journalists and writers is their in-depth energy reporting, their keen research, their creativity to cover things not normally covered in the general or even the energy press for that matter. Their courage to tackle tough matters, covering issues, energy items which matter the most in our country and in this world. So with that, welcome, Robert. We've known each other a while, and this is my first time meeting you, David. So this is really, really great. So
Thank you.
To have you, at least we could talk about this. And I bring things from an independent energy producer's perspective. And so talk a little bit about yourselves and where you focus. And if you want to go first, Robert, so go ahead.
Sure. Well, I'll keep it brief. I'm based in Austin, Texas. I'm native of Tulsa, Oklahoma, which for about 20 minutes was the oil capital of the world. I'm an author. I'm a journalist. I'm a podcaster. I'm a film producer. I'm on Substack, robertbryce.substack.com. I'm going to plug that mercilessly today. So yeah, robertbryce.substack.com. Is where I'm sending people, but I've been following David Blackmon's work for a long time. I love the energy and power businesses. These are the most important industries in the world, and unfortunately, we're getting a lot of bad policy lately. But let's talk about that. That's more interesting than talking about me.
Okay, and David, you like to jump in?
Yeah, I'm David Blackmon. I'm actually from South Texas, grew up in Beeville, Texas, went to school in Austin at UT and Texas A&I University in Kingsville. Was in the industry for 40 years with independent producers, pretty much all that time except for a year at Shell. Got out of there as fast as I could. No offense, folks at Shell, but I just couldn't stand it. I'm also on Substack, davidblackmon.substack.com. Blackmon.substack.com is my energy-focused website there. You can find everything I do there. I write for Forbes.com. I write for the Daily Caller, do a lot of podcasting. My favorite podcast is the Energy Transition podcast I do with three partners. And, I'm fascinated with energy. I've been in it all my life. I want my kids to have the same standard of living and my grandkids that I enjoyed. And so I just try to report the facts about what's happening instead of the narrative.
Okay, well, that's great. And noticed that both of you are on Substack, and that's been a real revolutionary site where you're not edited and you're not thrown out and you're not. Talk a little bit about where you guys started on that and what has been the effect of that.
Can't be canceled. That's the thing. You can't be canceled. And that's the, I spent my whole career in journalism. I've never had a real job. And I've written for a whole bunch of different publications over more than 30 years and the New York Times, the Washington Post, and blah, blah, blah. I can give you a long list. But what I realized, and I didn't go to Substack on purpose. I kind of got kicked off of MailChimp because they decided something I had. They didn't, some algorithm flagged it. And I thought, okay, well, I am so out of here. And not only are you raising your rates, you're going to flag my content for some reason you won't identify. Okay, right. I'm going to Substack. And I'm really glad that I did because it gives me the flexibility, the freedom to write what I want, when I want, how I want, and more particularly to publish the images that I create. And, I do a lot of public speaking, so I'm creating slides that do comparisons, which is absolutely key to understand what's going on. So I'm just free on Substack now. I'll go to a paid model eventually, but right now I'm just very much enjoying the freedom of the platform and also seeing how it is changing, I think, and fairly rapidly, the journalism model. For years and decades in my whole career, it's always been, oh, you write for that publication, you're part of their, you're part of their stable. Well, I think the legacy media, and I'll stop after saying this, that legacy media, particularly when it comes to energy and power, has so discredited itself that the future, I think, in a lot of journalism is going to be with the broader public following journalists that they trust, not publications that they used to believe in.
I think that's right. Yeah, I completely agree with everything Robert said there. And Substack does give you a freedom to write what you really think and in a way that you really want to say it. Whereas, if you're part of a stable of writers at a legacy publication, you're held to journalistic standards, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I have tremendous freedom at Forbes to write about a wide variety of topics, and very rarely get called to the carpet on things. But when I do, I understand why. You have to have standards, and I try to maintain standards on Forbes. I mean, on Substack as well. But some of these things you have to be able to write about very bluntly, and without any kind of a flowery language around it. You have to be able to say bluntly what it is and what it isn't. And too much of what we see in the media these days is a narrative that is not based in facts, and we have to get past that and start making policy based on the real world as it exists, and not as some wish it existed.
Well, and if I could just add to that, David and Jerry, that I think that, having been in that business for a long time and written for publications, and, oh, well, did you get the narrative from the other side, right? Did you get that?
Right.
What does Greenpeace say? Well, okay, let me be clear. I don't give an F what Greenpeace says. And so I am not going to quote Greenpeace on my Substack, and I'm just not going to do it. But that is part of this, both sidism that is so prevalent in the legacy media outlets. And also, I think that what I hope to bring, and I think what David does as well, is a lifetime of experience in reporting on these things that gives me, I hope, I believe, that some depth of knowledge that I can have, explain to my readers why this matters. What is the comparison here? What is the history of this issue? And that is one of the big problems with the reporting on, particularly, well, I'll just a specific example, this recent power plant rule, the proposed rule that the EPA put out that could kill all the coal plants in America and most of the natural gas plants. And so the big media outlets, Politico and New York Times, they put, oh, well, this is just another rule that the Biden administration put out, and, it's CCS and hydrogen, with no understanding of what CCS is. I mean, kind of no understanding of what the potential ramifications are, nor that the rule was published almost exactly a month after the EPA said, oh, and the car industry has to make 2/3 of their cars electric by 2032, which would put even more demand on the grid. So I followed both of those things. So I thought, well, these are connected, and you have to make sure that it's connected. And that was what, on Substack in particular, it's not just the content, it's the ability to write at length that you can't do. And I've written for the Wall Street Journal op-ed page. Well, they have 300 or 400 words. You can't explain it all in 400 words. You've got to have some depth to be able to, it takes me that long to clear my throat,
Right. Yeah. Well, and most of you have had some success recently with what you've put out there, like the Wisconsin windmills or the renewables in Wisconsin. There was a Wall Street Journal article about the backlash from that. And I think you've had some too, David, haven't you? The mainstream press has grabbed a hold of what you'd reported on 5 months ago.
Yeah, Fox News did that recently, actually, on one of their daytime programs. I didn't even know about it until the next day, but yeah, stuff gets picked up, all over the place, and a lot of times I only find out weeks later, but that's fine.
Do some of these media outlets use what you do for research and check on facts and all that and see what your perspective is? Or are you guys seeing some of that?
Well, I am seeing, I've been gratified. I mean, I think, I've been for years now, almost more than a decade, tracking land use conflicts and renewables. And so I've created the Renewable Rejection Database. I'm heartened and, flattered that just in the last few weeks, the Washington Post twice cited my work. And so it's been cited in other publications as well. And I'm publishing that on Substack. But it's also, I think the journalism model is gradually changing, and I think it is moving more toward, and what Substack allows is independent journalists to actually make a buck, and without having too much overhead or having to manage their own newsletter and payments and the rest of it. So, I think Doomberg has really been one of the leading lights in showing how
Yeah.
That's
this
interesting.
model can work, and tremendous respect for what Doomberg is doing. I mean, who would have thunk a green chicken would, turn the world upside down in the way that he has? But I mean, it's just been remarkable. So yeah, I'm heartened, but like every other journalist, and I'll speak for David here too. Damn it, we wish we had more influence, wish we had better attention, wish that when these, a lot of these publications, and I've seen it where my numbers get used by other journalists without crediting me.
Right. Yeah.
Happens all the time.
It
right?
does. Yeah.
But this is, journalists, if I'm going to wait around for a pat on the back from other journalists, I'm going to wait a long time. But anyway, I'm consider myself incredibly lucky. I'm not, believe me, I'm not griping here. I'm just trying to give you my assessment of where the world is now, and hoping to grow my Substack and grow what I'm doing, because otherwise, why do it?
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat. I'm incredibly lucky, and I say it a lot because I'm doing exactly what I'm interested in, and I've been able to. My job has been focused on things I'm really and truly interested in and love to deal with for 30 years now. When I was in government affairs in the industry itself for a long time, and that was always my passion in life, and so. To be able to spend my semi-retirement years writing and talking about the same things is a real blessing, and I hope I'm not wasting it.
No, I mean, what you put out, David, is incredible. The volume and the articulate stories and the just.
Well, I am wordy. Yes, I'm prolific.
Just the creativity is incredible for both of you. But
I admire Robert so much because he's so much more organized than I am. I just, that database you created and all that work you've done in that area is just tremendous, and what an incredible public service, I think.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I upgraded the renewable rejection database at fairly significant cost on my website and at robertbryce.com. If you haven't gone there, then go to robertbryce.com, but also robertbryce.substack.com. But I wanted to upgrade it to make it look more professional, because before, for years, I just kept a database on a spreadsheet, and then I'd update the Excel spreadsheet through Google Sheets into my website, or my web guy would. And I realized, well, no, I needed to upgrade it, and now it's searchable by year, by date. I've segregated the wind rejections from the solar rejections. And I followed that credo, W. Edwards Deming said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And so I had to get the database into a format that people could look at and say, oh, well, this is legit. And here, it's not just me saying this, here's the URL with the publication. You can look at it yourself. Because, one of the things that's so clear, and I believe David and I completely agree on this, is that the media narratives, the legacy media narratives, backed by the big moneyed interests, particularly from New York, the big banks, big law firms, big business, have been continually claiming, oh, wind and solar, rural America, they love this. Oh, it's being accepted. These farmers and ranchers, they're making extra income and la la la. It's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie. All across rural America, rural Americans are fighting against these projects. Now, some landowners do make money, right? Just as in the oil and gas business. You own the minerals, you make some little money. But the overwhelming majority of them don't. And all across America, particularly in the bluest states, they're rejecting these projects left and right. So, to be able to point this out and continue, just because I'm so goddamn stubborn, to keep reporting on it, that it's been gratifying to see some of the reporting change, and that I think some more legacy media outlets are reporting on it. The Guardian did a really good piece on this insane solar expansion in the Mojave Desert just a couple of days ago.
Yeah. I always like to challenge people who claim that rural people love the wind industry to drive through Taft, Texas sometime, which is a little town just north of Corpus Christi on Highway 181 that is surrounded by 300-foot tall windmills all over the damn place in a part of the state that is a known corridor for a variety of species of migratory birds. It's destroying the bird populations down there in South Texas. It and other wind installations that have been needlessly put down there in that part of our state. They're not adding anything useful to the grid, but they're just there because they've been subsidized and there's the capital to build them. And you know, to think that the people in that town love that is incredibly unrealistic. They don't love that. They hate it. And who would want to live around that? It's an eyesore, and it's no value to our economy or the grid. And it's the kind of thing that just absolutely drives me crazy. And you know, I just wish we could get away from just craziness like that.
Chase CEO Diamond wants to have eminent domain so that they can put these projects, and they want to steal people's lands essentially.
It's follow the money. I mean,
a little backhanded the whole way. I mean,
this is not, you know, this is not rocket science, brain science,
very,
surgery, rocket surgery, whatever. Follow the money. Who's making the money here? You know, this is one of the oldest axioms, or at least it's, you know, goes back to Watergate years, right? Follow the money. Well, who's making money here? It's the big banks. Why did Jamie Dimon say that he thinks we need to use eminent domain so they can build wind and solar faster? Well, if that means JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in America, getting bigger all the time, if they don't build more wind and solar, then JP Morgan doesn't get to do tax equity finance. They're one of the biggest players in tax equity finance. I mean, they're $20 billion a year. That's the sector that they're involved in, and they're one of the biggest players. If they don't have eminent domain to take more land for wind and solar, their business shrinks. So, you know, this is, okay, I'm going to be very clear. I don't think any of this has anything to do with climate change. It's all about the money. You know, it's being done in the name of climate change. Oh, we have to do this because of climate change. You know, clean energy, green energy, decarbonization. Okay, that's the rhetoric. The reality is follow the money. Who is making bank here? It's big banks, big business, and big law firms at the expense of rural Americans and consumers. I think it's just that simple.
Yeah, it's an enormous transfer of wealth, and maybe the biggest in human history, I think, already. And you know, there was a report last week, was it Morgan Stanley? It might have been JP Morgan. I think it was Morgan Stanley, put out a report estimating that the establishment for China-free supply chain, just for lithium to build all those lithium-ion batteries in the United States and the rest of the Western world, is going to cost $7 trillion. This is a tiny sliver of the energy transition. $7 trillion between now and 2035. That is, what's that equivalent to? That's equivalent to a dozen Inflation Reduction Act subsidies. Okay. I mean, in 12 years.
It's roughly half of U.S. GDP, right? U.S. GDP is about 13 trillion, something like that.
And that's for a tiny sliver of the energy transition.
Right.
And that's only for the storage. We haven't even charged the batteries yet. Right. So that's, yeah. I mean, I spoke in Des Moines a couple of weeks ago, and there was a guy there, an executive with Mid-American Energy. And since you brought up storage, David, I'll just add to that. He pointed out that if you have to go to a storage-based system, it will double electricity prices. And I said, wait a minute, I want to make sure I'm hearing you correctly. You said if we try to go to a system that requires renewables and batteries, that it will double electricity rates. And he said, yes. So, and this all assumes that we can mine enough lithium, cobalt, manganese, nickel, all of these other things that are going to be required. There's so much insanity around all of this that it's hard, you know, I think what, if David and I are similar, it's like, well, how many of these can we tackle? Because there's so many of them, and David publishes more often than I do, but it's, you know, oh, here's another insanity. Here's another bit of craziness. Here's another big thing that's being said that has no basis in the physical world.
Yeah, it is. It's all very crazy, and there's no real, when you really analyze it, there's no real structure around this quote plan. It's just this series of massive money outlay. You know, you print $600 billion to subsidize green energy over the next decade in the United States. And where do you end up? Well, there's no subsidies for transmission lines, first of all. And you're going to have to build 47,000 miles of new transmission just to accommodate wind and solar over the next dozen years. Well, where's the money for that going to come from? Well, we're going to have to pass another IRA subsidy bill with about $1 trillion in subsidies just for the transmission. You know, and it's just this series of, oh, we didn't think of that, we didn't think of this, and where's the money going to come from? Well, we'll just print it and create inflation. And anyway, it's insanity, and it's like Robert says, you just follow who is benefiting from this, who's taking in the wealth, and it's, you know, it's people who are already billionaires basically.
Right. Well, and here we are, domestic U.S. oil and gas, natural gas and coal. I mean, we have tons of that. We're kind of pushed. Oh yeah, we got those guys, but we're phasing them out because this is the future. Yet our energy is affordable, reliable. It's not going to be shut down by a intermittent sun or wind or night, for that matter. We produce 24/7, and we spend a lot of good money on that. And you know, I mean, to get away from preaching to the choir, what do you guys see as how we can get away from preaching to the choir? How does this message of the country's economic suicide, how does it get out to reasonable people? And I mean, I think people that I know, they just nod their heads and go, "Yeah, I know it's a crock." They're not in the business, and they understand. They're in business, and they understand just where things are going. I mean,
let me jump in for a second, if I could, Jerry. I don't.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I don't think we have enough time to talk about how to, you know, change the narrative. But I have some thoughts on that. But I want to build on just one point that David made about the subsidies and what they're doing. And so remember the investment tax credit largely used for solar, the production tax credit largely used for wind energy. They're just blanket subsidies. The incentive is there just to whoever the developer is will just go build this, and there's no direction, no kind of guidance in terms of, well, where do you build it, right? And where is the value that it might be that if you're going to build that resource, it makes the most sense to put it, say, you know, in Rhode Island or in Western Colorado or the Permian Basin in Texas, which is short of electricity generation capacity right now. I know that for a fact. Yeah. Well, it's just a blanket subsidy. So whoever is the developer, whoever can get the project permits, can get access to a high voltage transmission lines and then offtake, well, they'll build it there. Whether or not it makes any sense from the grid standpoint to build it at all.
Right.
And so this is an incredibly important point, because we have at the same time the North American Electric Reliability Council, PJM, one of the biggest RTOs in America, warning of reliability. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the 4 commissioners spoke before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee on May 4th saying, we are concerned about reliability. And yet we're dispensing, we, the taxpayers, are foregoing hundreds of billions of dollars in federal tax revenue to incent the construction of wind and solar projects, regardless of whether they have any value to the grid or not. I mean, this is just... okay, we're on a fucking crazy. I don't want to get technical, but it is absolute crazy town. And
it really is.
And so, but to, you know, your point, Jerry, you know, how does the industry, how do we change minds? You know, if I knew that, I'd be richer than Karl Rove. You know, I'd have all kinds of money, and I'd own Fox News and the rest of it. How do we how do we get more people involved? How do we make people understand? How do we educate? Pack a lunch and repeat what you said, and then pack another lunch and keep going. I don't know of any other technology, anything else that's going to be more effective than what I'm trying to do, what David's trying to do, Chris Wright, Toby Rice, you know, people in the industry who are working to, you know, change the narrative. But I just, you know, if I knew how to change it, if I knew what the secret sauce was, I'd share it with you.
Yeah. I mean, it's something the industry itself has struggled with for decades, how to make even a dent in the narrative. You know, API spends $100 million a year on fancy ad campaigns that you don't even really know what they're advertising most of the time. And I don't know that makes any difference, but they try at least. You know, we're doing it on a shoestring. I know Robert's in the same boat I'm in. You're always struggling to figure out a way to make a little money doing what we're doing.
Right. Well, yeah,
and it's hard, you know, because I mean, the green groups have all these foundations, Rockefeller, Park Foundation, all this hundreds of millions, billions of dollars flows into all these green groups. But there's nothing like that similar for doing the kind of messaging we're trying to do and putting out the kind of information we're trying to put out. So money's a struggle. And then, we have platforms. But I'm a one-man operation. I don't know if Robert is or not, but I don't have anybody else writing content for me. So there's just a limit to what we can do. But God knows we try, and it's fun. I'm having fun doing it. So hopefully it's having some effect.
I heard Roger Bilkey the other.
I believe it does. I think that it is having an effect and a positive one. And so I will say that I think what we are doing is having a positive effect. Otherwise, I wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Are we as effective as we might be? Well, maybe. But I want to build on one other point that David made, which is absolutely critical, and it's a point that I made on my Substack, robertbryce.substack.com, that the anti-industry industry, the NGOs, they're not green groups, they're not environmental groups, they're NGOs, they're climate-focused NGOs. The amount of money that they are spending is $4.5 billion a year. Their budgets, their combined budgets are 4.5 times greater than the amount of money that is being spent by the traditional energy NGOs. And that's a broad sweep of think tanks, including API and Natural American Gas Association, and then a few small think tanks, Center for the American Experiment, and a few others. It's less than $1 billion. But you look at Environmental Defense Fund and the groups that I think are a sign of decadence in America, and I use that word as the right word: the Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council, Climate Imperative, Greenpeace, Rocky Mountain Institute. Their combined budgets are $4.5 billion a year. The traditional hydrocarbon sector and the nuclear sector, they're getting their butts kicked. I mean, it's not even close. Not even close.
Not even close. Can I make one other point about that?
Please.
It's just a point of real frustration to me this week. I want everyone who watches this, go out to the Texas Tribune and take a look at who their contributors to their funding foundation. The Texas Tribune is a web-based publication here in Texas, in partnership with ProPublica, a group of former journalists whose mission in life it is to destroy the oil and gas industry and fossil fuel industries in America. And if you look at their list of contributors, you're going to find all kinds of people and companies in the oil and gas industry is contributing to that effort. If you read Politico's overnight power switch newsletter, at least one day every week, it's sponsored by Chevron. Okay, the Politico is a left-wing political, again, another web-based organization, one of whose goals is to kill the oil and gas industry. So another thing that people in the oil and gas business itself could stop doing is funding media outlets whose goal it is to destroy your business. That would be a good idea too, and that's all I'll say about it.
Well, if I can bring up one other point, Jerry, about what I think is, what is happening. So if we talked about a lot of things that are maybe depressing or not, not taking us in the wrong direction. What are the positive things that I think are happening? Well, one is I think that the narrative is changing, particularly around nuclear energy. I see a change in the rhetoric around it. I see it, we don't have nearly as much bipartisan support in Washington as we should have. But that said, I see there is a different generation of people, younger people in particular, generation shift when it comes to support for nuclear energy that I think is very positive. And that is something that is growing. And you can watch people like Chris Kiefer, the Canadian, who's a friend of mine. He's been on my podcast. I've been on his. He runs the Decouple podcast. Has been incredibly effective in mobilizing pro-nuclear activism and having real positive effect on the Canadian government in deploying new nuclear and also revisiting and re-upping the existing nuclear plants, the CANDU reactors in Canada. You see similar kind of activism saving Diablo Canyon in California, the nuclear plants in Illinois. So there are things that are very positive as well that are happening. And I think the change in some of the media coverage around renewables, those are things that I think are positive. Younger journalists looking around and saying, hey, maybe this isn't the right thing. And then I also think the vulnerability of the U.S. to foreign supply chains, and is something that is getting more attention in Congress, as well it should. That, you know, this whole alt energy thing, not that it's this myth about the energy transition, it plays into the hands of the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party. And I think that it's time for the U.S. policymakers to wake up. And I think that that is slowly happening, because this entire alt energy shift is about increasing dependence on China, or ultimately will mean more reliance on China.
Will.
And that is, I'm not a China basher, but China, I'll be clear, that China is not our friend.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. We're headed for a dependency on China for all these energy minerals, all the supply chains for all kinds of equipment and technology, and that's the alternative. That's the path we're being led down. And you know, I'm afraid it's going to take a major energy crisis for any of this to truly turn around. But I agree with Robert that we are starting to see some people starting to step back and really try to think through some of this stuff, and realizing that reality is not necessarily reflecting the narrative.
Well, and if the consequences of so much of this is higher costs, the increase of energy poverty of the low and middle class citizens of our country, just the desperate need and the overabundance of these costs is. I mean, you'd think that would have consequences overall to the economy, slowing it down. Just
the poorest among us get hurt the worst.
We're seeing beginnings of that.
Well, we see this in spades in California, Jerry. I mean, this is where California is providing the example of what not to do, how not to handle your energy economy. I've reported on this again on my Substack that since 2008, when Arnold Schwarzenegger signed into law this mandate for renewables, at that time was 30% or 33%, something like that, and now it's 100% clean energy, clean electricity by 2045. Power prices in California have gone up faster than any other state in America. Yeah. And now they're, you know, by far, in terms of the entire United States, the second highest average electricity prices in America are in California, a state that has the highest poverty rate in the country. I mean, all of this climate policy screws the poor and the middle class. And yet, here's the Democratic Party. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I am disgusted. But the Democratic Party, which has claimed for years to be the party of the working class, has abandoned the working class in a big way. And I had Rui Teixeira on the Power Hungry podcast a few days ago, and we talked about this very thing. You know, and he still considers himself a Democrat. I don't know why. I mean, I don't consider like I said, I'm not a member of any party, but he still is supportive of the Democratic Party, even though they have completely abandoned the poor and the working class on this fundamental issue of energy and power. And I just find that inexcusable. And it's, you know, I get irritated, I get fired up about it, because it's one of the things that motivates me to do what I do, because I find this so scurrilous, so incredibly obnoxious and unthinking and uncompassionate. And yet that is the road that California is showing ahead of us. And it's just an insane policy.
Well, and
you all got me all worked up here. Damn it, Blackmon, you're getting me all irritated.
I have that effect on people. Yeah,
we're the beneficiaries in the San Juan Basin of California's policies. When the first of the month natural gas prices for January were $33 per MMBTU.
Oh yeah,
their storage was 40% down. Their wind and solar weren't working. It was just an amazing, convergence of their distorted markets, their distorted policies, and they needed natural gas, and they'd shut down many of their own local in-state storage facilities, and how
much of that price spike, though, Jerry, was due to that Kinder Morgan pipeline going out of service? Wasn't that partly due to that?
That was part of the reason. Yes, and part of it was just the fact that they shut down natural gas generators. They shut down, storage fields. They wouldn't put them back on. They wouldn't put them back on. So there's probably a story behind that. Anyways, daily prices were anywhere from $10 to $50 per MMBTU, and some of the prices were were
My
just,
goodness.
just amazing that I saw in some of our checks that we got. Other than results and consequences, I mean, some of us in our industry say, "Well, I'm going to be vindicated someday if I'm still alive to see all this," and I tend to think that myself if I'm going to survive some of this. But I mean, I think we're seeing like we see in California, and of course, Dr. Constable showed us what's going on in the UK and Germany with some of the humongous prices that they have, and just the electricity consumption decline, and we started to see that in the United States, which does not bode well for economic sanity, does not bode well for having prosperous lives and growing our economies. And David, you touched on that in Europe, how they use special language to talk about degrowth. That
Yeah.
This is a social. We're going to have social growth. We're not going to have economic growth. We're going to have
There's
we're going to better
social
the lives
market.
of everybody via social growth. And I think
Right.
Americans are adopting some of that language too. And that leaves us independent producers going, well, if we can get the funding, we're going to be there, and we're going to be there when the crisis happens. Yet, are we going to be there? I mean, the big companies will be. They speak out of one side of their mouth on. Chevron does, but the other side of the mouth, they just spent $6.5 billion to buy a local energy E&P
Right.
producer here in the Denver Basin. So,
Yep.
A little comment on that, please.
Yeah, they bought PDC Energy, really increased their position in the DJ Basin. And I'm sure that makes a lot of financial sense to Chevron. Chevron is definitely focused on growing its footprint in U.S. shale, as is Exxon. And so I think you'll probably see Exxon Exxon's got so much cash on hand, they have to do something with it. And so the rumor about Pioneer popped up again a month ago, and they've been talking to Pioneer off and on for a long time. And Scott Sheffield's getting ready to retire at the end of the year. So yeah, a lot of people are thinking we may see that deal before the year's over. But yeah, there is probably more consolidation coming to the shale patch in the United States. And, I think that's just kind of a natural progression of things with, when you have companies like that are interested in growing and turning it into basically a manufacturing operation. And that's what Exxon and Chevron and Oxy are all focused on. I just think you're going to see more and more consolidation in shale as time goes on.
And I'll just add one quick thing to me, and I Tulsa is my hometown, so a lot of people still a lot of oil field and oil related manufacturing in Oklahoma and Tulsa in particular. But that consolidation is natural, I suppose, in any industry, but it is squeezing out a lot of the smaller players because they can't afford to compete, right? They just can't afford to drill a well that would cost $5-10 million. They can't put that kind of capital together. So that that shale has fundamentally changed America's energy fortunes, but it has also had a different impact, an impact on the industry that I think is going to continue, right? Which is it's going to be more about the bigger and bigger players because they have the scale to be able to do it. But I think that's also worth mentioning too before we quit, which is that the Permian has been incredibly productive, but we have to be aware too of the limits on production here in the United States, just like everything else, right? So I increasingly think about and talk about the network of networks, right? We live in a world where you go to the supermarket, well, it's incredible, all the stuff that's there, right? But it depends on all of these different networks of suppliers and supply chains. The same is true very broadly in the energy sector, and it's true for for the upstream and midstream and downstream, that this network is not going to be able to grow that much. And because of the constraints on water availability, labor, a particularly important issue that I've been writing about. In fact, I'm writing a piece about a lineman shortage, electric lineman shortages. So that, we have to be very clear about what this big push about, alt energy is about. And this assumption that we're going to shift to something else. No, it's going to be an incredibly slow and methodical process because systems this big don't change that quickly.
I think our friend John Constable said that energy transitions takes 100 years for those to happen. Maybe it was him or somebody else, but they do take a while. mean, if we have a degrowth policy, which I think everyone's saying out of the sides of their mouth, even people want to disrupt that, it's going to be difficult for us as far as a country to keep going. And you're right, Robert, we don't have the reserves that say Iraq does, or we don't have the reserves that some of those Middle Eastern companies do. They have just enormous reserves compared to the United States. We're just really aggressive and have private industry that's been going out there doing it. So,
yeah,
short of the consequences of that we've talked about, and some of the positive narratives, what do you see as the end game? Where we're at today? What will this all look like in 5 years with these, which I think are many of the economic consequences that we're going to see? What is your final view on that, each of you?
Well, Robert touched on the energy minerals question early on in our podcast today, and I think the energy minerals supply constraints are going to be a real train wreck in the next 5 years or so. I think that's going to be the germination of a pretty significant crisis for renewable energy, because we're not going to open another 300 mines around the world, hard rock mining operations, to supply lithium and cobalt and copper and silver and nickel and all this array of energy minerals. It's not going to happen. And we're not going to increase the supply of lithium by 900% by 2030. It's not going to happen. And so all of that's going to end up producing a real crisis in terms of the ability of these renewable industries and lithium ion battery makers to make their products at the scale that would be needed to replace all the coal and natural gas plants we're in the process of prematurely shutting down. And at some point, you're going to have a collision of those factors that's going to end up in a real power generation capacity constraint on the U.S. grid and in the rest of the Western world. And when that happens, costs are going to go through the roof, much more so than we've seen the last couple of years. So when that happens, we're going to have a real change in direction where energy policy is concerned. It's going to be forced by the voters, and this is all very foreseeable. And I expect it all to really kind of happen between now and I'd say 2027, 2028. So I'm not at all optimistic about the near term.
Mm-hmm.
In the longer term, we have a lot of resources, and in the United States, but in other parts of the world as well. And we'll come through it and come out at the end in a better position than we're in today to withstand, to sustain ourselves for the long haul. But there's going to be a big crisis in the next few years.
Well, I hope there isn't. I fear that there might be. And I'm asked frequently, is it going to take a crisis? And it may well require that. But let me be clear as well. I'm so long-term bullish U.S. I can't even explain it to you. I'm optimistic to the point of idiocy, as Molly Ivins, the late Molly Ivins, said. The U.S., for all of its faults, and we could spend the many hours discussing them, and we see a lot of those faults very clearly today in our political system. But we have advantages over the rest of the world that are truly incredible. Geographic, demographic, logistical, resource-based, the rule of law, available capital, venture capital, and technology and inventiveness. We'll stumble through, but I think we have to be very cognizant of not effing it up. And that is the danger, that we F it up with this abundance, and we're allowing this decadence to creep into our society, and this decadence, these parasitic forces, these decadent parasitic forces, the NGO, the industry, that they are aiming at the destruction, I think is the right word, or the decline of our most important foundational economic sectors. And with this idea, we'll run the economy on something else and we'll do it with renewables. No, you can't, so we need some sobriety. We need some real sobriety when it comes to the policy side. And I hope we are going to get there, but I think it is going to be episodic. I think it's going to be a lot of state-based differentials, right? California is going to show what not to do, and Texas is going to say, well, we're not going to do that. And now ERCOT is not the shining example of what it might be. But I think, the diversity of America and the strengths of America, I think, are going to win out. And so we can screw up a little, we can't screw up a lot. How about that, if I put it that way?
That's a great way to end economic and energy sobriety. I can go with that, and that's a great discussion. Both of you, thank you very much. I'm very honored to have you on this hosted podcast of Energy IQ, and really appreciate your time.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate the invitation. It was great having a discussion with you guys.
Yes,
yeah, flattered to be invited, Jerry. Thank you, and great to meet you, David. We've followed each other for a while, and glad to get a little not FaceTime, Zoom time. So
okay.